The first thing the galaxy learned about humanity was how wrong it had been. They said our weapons were obsolete, primitive, inefficient. They said no species that still relied on throwing chunks of metal through space could ever threaten a civilization that bent gravity, warped energy, and shaped matter itself. They were so sure of it, they didn't even slow down. And that was their first mistake. The Imperial observation deck hovered in silent perfection above the glowing curve of Earth, its massive structure cloaked in shimmering distortion fields. Thousands of ships drifted behind it, sleek, luminous constructs of impossible geometry, the pride of an empire that had not known defeat in over 6,000 cycles. High Admiral Sereth Vallis stood at the center of the chamber, her elongated silhouette framed by the cold light of distant stars. Her eyes, multi-layered and reflective, studied the blue planet below with detached curiosity. Confirmation, one of her analysts said, voice smooth and untroubled. The species identifies itself as human. Technological level, subthreshold, primary weapon systems, chemical propulsion, and kinetic delivery platforms. A faint ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. Kinetics, another officer repeated. As in physical projectiles? Yes. There was a pause, then soft, dismissive laughter. Sereth didn't laugh. She simply tilted her head, considering. No energy lattice weapons? No gravitic distortion arrays. None detected. High Admiral. Defensive capabilities? Minimal. Planetary shielding is fragmented and localized. Fleet shielding inconsistent. Inferior by all measurable standards. For a moment, silence returned. Then Sereth spoke, calm and absolute. Then, this will be brief. Behind her, the Empire's armada shifted formation. Thousands of vessels aligning with perfect precision, their hulls glowing faintly as power flowed into weapon systems that had erased entire civilizations without resistance. Below them, Earth rotated quietly, unimpressed, unafraid. Humanity had already seen them coming. On the surface, deep beneath layers of reinforced alloy and stone, the command center buzzed with controlled urgency. No panic, no chaos, just focus. Admiral Elias Rook stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the tactical projection hovering in front of him. The alien fleet was overwhelming, beautiful in a distant, terrifying way. Still think they'll talk? Someone asked. Rook didn't look away. No. A pause. They sent a message, another officer added, demanding immediate surrender and disarmament. Specifically, they want us to dismantle all kinetic weapon platforms. That earned a quiet chuckle from someone in the room. Rook's lips twitched slightly. Of course they do. Response. He exhaled slowly, then finally turned. Send them this. We're not interested in surrender. And we're definitely not giving up the only weapons that have never failed us. The transmission went out. Up in orbit, it was received instantly. Sereth listened to the translated message, her expression unchanged. But something flickered in her gaze. Not anger, something closer to confusion. They refuse, the analyst confirmed. And they intend to resist, another added. With kinetics, someone said, unable to hide their disbelief. This time, Sereth did react, but only slightly. A narrowing of her eyes. A subtle shift in posture. Begin demonstration, she ordered. One of the Imperial ships moved forward, its hull unfolding like liquid light. Energy gathered at its core, bright, concentrated, impossibly dense. Target, the weapons officer asked. Sereth considered for a fraction of a second. A minor installation, she said. Something visible. Something instructive. Coordinates were selected. On Earth, alarms flared. Rook watched as the projection highlighted the incoming energy spike. He didn't flinch. Impact in 5 seconds, someone said. No one moved to stop it. There was no way to. A beam of pure energy lanced down from orbit. Silent, precise, unstoppable. It struck a remote military outpost in the middle of an uninhabited desert. For a brief moment, there was light. Then there was nothing. The entire installation, every structure, every vehicle, every trace of human presence was simply gone. Back in orbit, a quiet satisfaction settled over the Imperial command. Demonstration complete, the weapons officer said. Sareth nodded once. Transmit again. Offer them a final opportunity to comply. The message was sent. Down below, Rook watched the aftermath replay. The destruction was absolute. Clean. Effortless. Hell of a show, one of his officers muttered. Rook didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached forward and adjusted the display, zooming out, past the ruined outpost, past the atmosphere, into orbit, where something else was waiting. Hundreds of human ships. They didn't glow. They didn't shimmer. They didn't look advanced. They looked solid. Angular hulls. Reinforced plating. Massive rail structures running along their spines. No elegance. No wasted design. Just purpose. Fleet status. Rook asked quietly. Ready, came the reply. All batteries? Loaded. A faint smile touched Rook's face. Good. Up above, the Empire's sensors finally began to register the human fleet in full detail. And for the first time, the laughter stopped. High Admiral, an analyst said slowly, we are detecting unusual mass signatures. Sareth turned her attention to the display. Clarify. The analyst hesitated. Their ships, they are carrying significant physical payloads. Dense materials. Accelerated launch systems. It appears they are preparing to fire. A beat of silence. With what? Someone asked. The answer came back, almost uncertain. Metal. Sareth stared at the projection, at the crude-looking vessels, at the long, exposed rails running along their hulls, at the complete absence of energy-based weaponry. And for the first time since entering this system, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. Let them fire, she said. Because in her mind, there was no scenario where this changed anything. No scenario where something so primitive could threaten something so advanced. Below her, across the void, Admiral Rook gave a single, quiet command. Fire. And across the human fleet, the rails lit up. Not with glowing energy, but with raw, violent force. Mass accelerated to impossible speeds. Metal turned into momentum. And the silence of space shattered. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. No explosions. No brilliant flashes. No cinematic display of destruction. Just silence. The kind of silence that made even the Empire's seasoned officers hesitate, if only for a heartbeat. Then the impacts began. At first, the sensors didn't even register them properly. The incoming projectiles were too small, too fast. Kinetic signatures buried beneath the noise threshold of systems designed to track energy weapons. Contact minimal, one analyst reported, confused. No significant energy discharge detected. Sareth didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the tactical display. Then one of the forward ships flickered. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion. No catastrophic failure. Just a brief distortion in its shielding field. Shield fluctuation, another officer noted. Negligible. And then it happened again and again. Tiny distortions. Rapid. Repeating. Like rain tapping against glass. Except this rain was traveling at a fraction of light speed. Why are the shields not compensating? Sareth asked, her voice still calm, but sharper now. The answer came too slowly. We were adjusting frequencies, but there's no consistent energy pattern to counter. Because there was no energy pattern, there was only mass. The next impact didn't flicker. It punched through. One of the Empire's cruisers, sleek, radiant, untouched by war for centuries, jerked violently as something tore straight through its forward section. A clean hull. Entry and exit. No explosion. No warning. Just absence. The ship drifted, systems failing in cascading silence. Report, Sareth demanded. Structural breach, the analyst said, voice tightening. Internal compartments exposed. We're losing pressure across multiple decks. How? No one answered. Because no one had seen it coming. On Earth, Admiral Rook watched the same moment unfold, but from a different perspective. First penetration confirmed, his tactical officer said, unable to hide the edge in her voice. Rook nodded once. Adjust targeting. Focus on shield overlap zones. Yes, sir. Around him, the room remained steady, focused. No cheering, no celebration, just execution. Because this was expected. Back in orbit, the Imperial fleet began to shift. Raise shield intensity, one officer ordered. Compensate across all frequencies. It's not working, another replied quickly. There's nothing to lock onto. No thermal spike, no radiation signature. Another impact. This time, 3 ships. Not destroyed, but opened. Hull plates peeled back like paper. Internal structures shredded by something that didn't burn, didn't explode. Just passed through, carrying everything with it. "Hi, Admiral," the analyst said, voice no longer steady. "We are detecting multiple high-velocity objects, bypassing shield harmonics entirely. The shields are reacting, but too late." Saratha's eyes narrowed. Too late. They're not being stopped. They're being ignored. The system doesn't recognize them as a threat until after impact. Because the shields were built to stop energy, not physics. Another ship went dark. Then another. Still no explosions. Just silence and damage. The kind that didn't announce itself until it was already done. "Return fire," Sarath said, her voice now cold. The fleet responded instantly. Brilliant beams of concentrated energy lanced toward the human formation. Precise, devastating, overwhelming. On the human side, alarms lit up. "Incoming." Rook didn't move. "Hold formation," he said. The first wave hit. Human ships weren't invincible. Not even close. One of the outer vessels took a direct strike and vanished in a burst of light. Another lost half its structure, spinning out of formation. A third simply disappeared. The room went quiet for half a second. Then, "Maintain fire," Rook said calmly. No hesitation. No panic. Because this was also expected. "Reload cycle?" he asked. 3 seconds. Good. Out in space, the human fleet adjusted, not retreating, not scattering, but tightening. Like a fist. Rails aligned again. Mass loaded again. Fire. The second volley hit harder. Not because the projectiles were larger, but because now they were aimed. Targeting shield nodes, the tactical officer reported. "We're hitting the same points repeatedly." On the Imperial side, the effects were immediate. "Shield collapse on multiple vessels," someone shouted. "How is that possible?" "They're not overpowering the shields, they're destabilizing them. Repeated kinetic stress is causing harmonic failure." Another cruiser ruptured, this time not just pierced, but torn apart as structural integrity failed under compounded impacts. Sarath stepped forward, her posture no longer relaxed. "Adapt," she ordered. "Reconfigure shield parameters to account for mass-based intrusion." "We're trying," the analyst replied. "But there's too much variation. Velocity, density, angle, it's unpredictable." Because humans weren't firing the same shot twice. They were learning, adjusting, evolving with every volley. On Earth, Rook watched the Imperial formation begin to falter. "See that?" his officer said quietly. "They're trying to understand it." Rook gave a small nod. "They won't," he said. "Why not?" "Because they built their entire doctrine around the idea that energy is everything." He glanced back at the display, at the streaks of invisible death crossing the void. "We never forgot about momentum." Another volley fired. Another line of Imperial ships compromised. And now, for the first time in centuries, the Empire's fleet began to pull back. Not a retreat, not yet, but a shift, a hesitation, a break in perfect formation. And in that tiny, almost imperceptible moment, the balance of power changed. Up on the observation deck, Sarath stood in absolute stillness as the reports flooded in. Damage, losses, failures, all from weapons her empire had dismissed as obsolete. Her gaze hardened. "Analyze everything," she said. "I want a complete understanding of these kinetics." "Yes, High Admiral." She turned back to the viewport, staring at the human fleet, at their crude ships, their primitive weapons, their impossible effectiveness. And for the first time, she didn't see a lesser species. She saw a problem. One that was only just beginning. The Empire had faced chaos before. Rebellions, unstable species, even civilizations that weaponized entire stars. But this was different. Because chaos usually looked unpredictable, humanity did not. From a distance, their fleet was almost disappointingly simple. No shimmering shields, no flowing geometry, no elegant energy constructs, just hard lines, heavy hulls, repeating structures, predictable, and yet nothing about them behaved the way it should. Full tactical reconstruction complete, the analyst said, projecting a rotating model of the human fleet into the center of the Imperial command chamber. Sareth stepped closer. Explain. The model zoomed in. Human ships weren't uniform, but they followed a pattern. Long, reinforced spines running the length of each vessel. Massive linear structures embedded into their hulls. Segmented compartments, modular, replaceable. Those are their primary weapons, the analyst continued. Electromagnetic acceleration rails. Each ship carries multiple variants. Variants? Sareth asked. Yes. Different calibers, different payload types. Some appear designed for penetration, others for fragmentation. Another officer leaned forward. They're not just firing projectiles. They're selecting them. The room went quiet, because that meant intent, not randomness, not desperation. Design. On Earth, Admiral Rook stood in front of a similar projection, but his version was far less polished. More practical, more human. Cycle through configurations, he said. The display shifted rapidly. One ship, then another, each slightly different. Different rail lengths, different firing angles, different ammunition feeds. Every ship's a little weird, one of the junior officers muttered. Rook smirked faintly. Yeah, that's the point. They're trying to map us, the tactical officer added. Figure out a pattern. There isn't one, Rook said. He let that hang for a moment. Not a single one they can solve, anyway. Back in orbit, the Empire continued its analysis. They shouldn't be this effective, one of the senior strategists said, frustration creeping into his tone. Kinetic weapons are limited by mass and acceleration. There are ceilings, constraints. And yet they are exceeding those constraints, Sareth replied calmly. How? The analyst hesitated, then expanded the projection further, revealing something unexpected. Because the ships are not their only weapons. The display shifted to show objects drifting between and behind the human fleet. At first glance, they looked like debris, chunks of metal, broken fragments, irregular shapes. But they were moving, slowly, deliberately. Those aren't debris fields, the analyst said. They're prepositioned mass clusters, dense materials, some of them incredibly large. A pause. They're using the battlefield itself, another officer whispered. Sareth's gaze sharpened. Explain. They're firing not just from their ships, but through these objects, using them for deflection, acceleration, assists, even fragmentation events. The realization spread through the room like a cold wave. They're turning space into a weapon. On Earth, Rook watched the same field from a different angle. Field integrity holding. The tactical officer reported. Mass clusters are in position. Good, Rook said. Keep them guessing. One of the engineers spoke up. We're getting some strange readings. Their sensors are trying to classify the clusters, but they can't decide what they are. Rook chuckled softly. Because they're looking for weapons, he said. And we're giving them rocks. A few people in the room smiled. Because it was true. Simple. Brutally simple. Back in orbit, the Empire made its next move. Deploy adaptive countermeasures, Sareth ordered. Target all foreign mass signatures in the engagement zone. Clear the field. Yes, High Admiral. Energy weapons shifted direction. Instead of targeting ships, they began sweeping through the space around them. Vaporizing clusters, shattering fragments, erasing anything that wasn't part of their fleet. For a moment it worked. The field cleared. The debris vanished. Field neutralized, the weapons officer confirmed. Sareth watched carefully. Now, she said, re-engage the fleet. Imperial ships surged forward again, confidence returning, formation tightening. But on Earth, Rook didn't react. Sir, someone asked. They're clearing the clusters. I see it, Rook said calmly. Should we deploy more? He shook his head. Not yet. A pause. Then, wait for it. Back in space, the Empire advanced. Closer now. Weapons charging. Victory reasserting itself. And then, the next human volley fired. But this time, it didn't come from where they expected. New trajectories detected, an analyst shouted. Sareth turned sharply. From where? The answer came with visible confusion. From behind us. That was impossible. There was nothing behind them. The field had been cleared. Every object destroyed. Every anomaly removed. And yet, impact struck the rear line of the Imperial formation. Hard, precise, devastating. One ship lost propulsion instantly. Another split along its central axis. A third simply went dark. How? Someone demanded. How are they firing from empty space? The analyst's voice trembled slightly. They're not. The display zoomed in, revealing something the Empire's sensors had missed. Tiny objects, microscopic compared to ships, too small to register as threats, too dense to ignore once accelerated. They seeded the field with micromass, the analyst said. Particles, slivers, fragments, so small our systems filter them out as background noise. Saratha's expression didn't change, but the air in the chamber did. They didn't need the large clusters, the analyst continued. Those were a distraction. Another impact. Another ship crippled. They just needed us to clear the way. On Earth, Rook finally allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. Phase 2 confirmed, the tactical officer said. Good, Rook replied. He looked at the projection, at the Imperial fleet now taking fire from angles they couldn't predict, couldn't track, couldn't stop. They think war is about bigger weapons, he said quietly. Another volley launched. Silent, invisible, inevitable. We think it's about using everything. Back in orbit, Sareth stood motionless as her fleet took damage from a direction that should not exist, from weapons that should not work, from an enemy that refused to follow any rules she understood. And for the first time, she adjusted her stance, not out of fear, but out of respect. Reclassify the enemy, she said. A pause. Then, firmly, humanity is no longer a primitive species. Her eyes locked onto the chaotic, unbreakable formation ahead. They are adaptive. Another impact. Closer now. Stronger. More precise. And the realization settled in, heavy and unavoidable. This fleet, this strange, unpredictable, relentless fleet, shouldn't exist. But it did. And it was winning. The moment the Empire realized it could be outmaneuvered, it changed the way it fought. Gone was the quiet confidence. Gone was the assumption of inevitable victory. What replaced it was calculation. New orders from High Admiral Sareth, the command channel echoed across the Imperial fleet. All vessels initiate adaptive formation. Prioritize maneuverability. Minimize predictable vectors. The Armada responded instantly. Perfect symmetry broke apart. Ships that once moved like a single organism now scattered into layered formations, rotating, shifting, overlapping fields of fire and defense. For the first time, they stopped trying to look invincible and started trying to win. On Earth, the shift was noticed immediately. They're adapting, the tactical officer said. Rook nodded slowly. Took them long enough. They're breaking formation, spreading out, reducing cluster vulnerability. Yeah, Rook muttered. They finally realized we like tight targets. The display updated. Imperial ships now moving unpredictably, their paths curving and intersecting in ways that made long-range kinetic targeting significantly harder. Firing solutions degrading, another officer reported. Hit probability dropping. Rook folded his arms, thinking. All right, he said after a moment. Then we stop trying to hit where they are. A pause. And start hitting where they're going to be. The room shifted slightly, focus sharpening. Predictive warfare. Not new. But against an enemy like this, it would have to be perfect. Back in orbit, Sareth watched as the human volleys began to lose precision. Not completely, but enough. Damage report stabilizing, an analyst said. Their accuracy is decreasing. Good, Sareth replied. Maintain motion. Do not allow them to establish predictive patterns. For a brief moment, it seemed like the Empire had regained control. Then, the next volley came, and everything changed again. New trajectories, multiple vectors, someone shouted. Sareth's eyes snapped to the display. The projectiles weren't traveling in straight lines anymore. They curved, not through propulsion, but through interaction. They're using gravitational assists, the analyst said, disbelief creeping into his voice. Firing past planetary bodies, debris remnants, even our own ship's mass signatures. The tactical display lit up with impossible angles. Projectiles slingshotting around objects, bending their paths just enough to bypass evasive maneuvers. They're predicting our movement and using our own gravity against us, another officer said. An Imperial destroyer attempted to dodge. It moved exactly as planned, exactly as predicted. The projectile met it anyway. Impact. Clean. Final. On Earth, Rook watched the hit confirmation. Got you, he murmured. The tactical officer looked at him. Sir, that calculation wasn't ours, Rook said. She blinked. What? Rook allowed himself a faint smile. It was theirs. Confusion flickered across her face. They're learning, he explained. Their movements, their evasions, it's all becoming predictable. And we're using that against them? No, Rook said softly. We're letting them use it against themselves. Another volley fired. This one even stranger than the last. Some projectiles missed intentionally, flying wide, seemingly wasted, until secondary impacts detected, the analyst shouted on the Imperial side. Sareth watched as those missed shots curved back, interacting with distant mass clusters, slingshotting into entirely new attack vectors. One struck from below, another from behind, a third from an angle no one had even been watching. This is not random, Sareth said, her voice now razor-sharp. They are constructing multi-stage attack paths. They're turning each shot into a chain reaction, the analyst confirmed. One projectile influences another, creating cascading trajectories. Another ship fell, then another. The Empire fired back harder, brighter, more destructive. Human ships continued to die. But they didn't break. They didn't scatter. They didn't retreat. They adapted, just like the Empire, only faster. On Earth, alarms flared as another human vessel was lost. Portside group taking heavy damage. Rook's gaze hardened, but his voice remained steady. Rotate them out. Bring in the second line. Yes, sir. The fleet shifted, not chaotically, but with purpose. Ships moved into gaps before those gaps even formed. Damaged vessels pulled back just as replacements surged forward. Like a living system, bleeding but functioning. Ammo status? Rook asked. 70% remaining across primary batteries. Good. Keep pressure on them. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the Imperial formation. They're trying to stabilize, he said. And if they do, the tactical officer asked. Rook's answer was immediate. They won't. Back in orbit, Sareth saw too. The human strategy, the layering, the constant pressure. They are not attempting a decisive strike, she said slowly. They are eroding us. Death by 1,000 cuts. But each cut was precise, intentional, and impossible to fully defend against. High Admiral, an officer said carefully. At current loss rates, we will not maintain superiority for long. Silence filled the chamber. Then Sareth made a decision. One the Empire had not made in centuries. Prepare full-spectrum assault, she ordered. The room froze. High Admiral, that will. And this, she finished coldly. Every ship in the Imperial fleet began to glow. Not with standard weapon charge, but with something deeper, something heavier. Reality itself seemed to bend slightly around them. On Earth, the change was immediate. Sir, the tactical officer whispered. Energy readings are spiking across the entire fleet. Rook stared at the display, then exhaled slowly. There it is, he said. They're done playing. A pause. Orders. Rook didn't answer right away, because he knew what was coming. A single, overwhelming strike. The kind that didn't care about tactics, or adaptation, or cleverness. Just raw, absolute power. He looked at the human fleet, at the ships still fighting, still holding, still trusting the plan. Then he gave the command, "Prepare for saturation." The room went still. "Sir, that'll put everything we have into one window." "I know, and if it doesn't work?" Rook cut him off. "It will." Out in the void, both fleets charged their next move. One built on power, the other on precision. And as the distance between them closed, as energy reached critical levels, as rails loaded for what might be their final volley, the war reached its breaking point. The moment before impact felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. Across the battlefield, the Imperial fleet burned with contained power. Thousands of ships radiating energy so dense it distorted the stars behind them. Space itself seemed to ripple, bending under the weight of what was about to be unleashed. It wasn't just another attack. It was annihilation. Full spectrum charge at 90%, an Imperial officer reported. Voice tight despite years of discipline. All vectors aligned. Sereth stood at the center of it all, unmoving. Her gaze locked forward. "This ends now," she said. For the first time since the battle began, there was no curiosity in her voice. No analysis. Only certainty. On the other side of the void, humanity prepared for something very different. No glowing buildup. No overwhelming surge. Just quiet, controlled motion. "Final calibration complete," the tactical officer said. "All ships synced." Rook nodded once. "Good. Sir, if their attack lands first." "It won't," he said. Not confidently, not arrogantly, just factually. Because everything depended on timing now. Everything. "Begin count," Rook ordered. 5. Across the fleet, massive rails adjusted by fractions of a degree. Tiny corrections. Microscopic changes. But at these speeds, they meant everything. 4. Ammunition locks disengaged. Not just standard rounds. Everything. Dense penetrators. Fragmentation slugs. Micromass packets. Even structural scrap. Anything that could carry momentum. 3. On the Imperial side, energy reached critical mass. Reality buckled harder now, light bending, space warping. Weapons designed not just to destroy matter, but to erase it. 2. Rook's eyes never left the display. "They think bigger wins," he said quietly. No one responded. "Show them what precise looks like." 1. Fire. Across the human fleet, everything launched. Not in a single wave, but in layers. Thousands of projectiles. Millions. Each one calculated. Each one timed. Each one part of something larger. At the same instant. "Release," Sereth commanded. And the Empire answered. A wall of energy erupted forward. Blinding. Unstoppable. A wave that consumed everything in its path. Space folding inward as it advanced, tearing through distance itself. For a split second, it looked like humanity had made a terrible mistake. The energy wave met the first layer of human fire and erased it completely. No resistance, no slowdown, just gone. "Impact confirmed," an Imperial officer said, relief creeping into his voice. "Their attack has been neutralized." But Sereth didn't speak, because she was still watching. The second layer hit. Not directly, not head-on. They passed beside the wave, around it, barely within its edge. Some were destroyed. Many were not. "They're skirting the perimeter," the analyst said, minimizing exposure. The third layer followed, then the fourth, each one adjusting slightly, each one refining the path, each one using the previous layer as data. "They're learning mid-attack," someone whispered, because humans didn't fire one shot. They fired a conversation, and every projectile was a word. On Earth, Rook stood completely still as the display updated in real time. "Losses?" he asked. "First and second layers mostly gone," the tactical officer replied. "Third layer partial survival, fourth and fifth holding trajectory." "Good," Rook said softly, "because that was the plan. Sacrifice the first waves. Let them map the threat. Let them refine the path. Keep tracking," he said. Out in the void, the surviving projectiles began to converge. Not randomly, not chaotically, but with terrifying intent. "They're not targeting ships," the Imperial analyst said suddenly. Saratha's gaze sharpened. Then what are they targeting? A pause. Then, the energy wave itself. For the first time, Saratha's composure cracked. What? The projectiles struck the edges of the Imperial attack. Not to stop it, not to destroy it, but to change it. Tiny impacts, minuscule disruptions. But at this scale, they mattered. They're altering its structure, the analyst shouted, creating instabilities, micro-fluctuations in the energy lattice. The massive wave began to ripple, subtle at first, then more, its perfect shape breaking. They're turning our attack into interference, another officer said, because energy, no matter how powerful, still obeyed physics, and humans knew exactly where to push. On Earth, Rook finally exhaled. There it is, he said. The tactical officer stared at the display in awe. They're not overpowering it. No, Rook said. They're ruining it. The energy wave continued forward, but now it was unstable, uneven, fragments of it collapsing inward, others flaring outward. When it finally reached the human fleet, it didn't hit like a wall. It hit like a storm. Still deadly, still devastating. Ships were lost. Entire sections of the formation vanished. But the fleet didn't disappear. It endured. Damage report, someone shouted. Severe, but we're holding. Rook nodded once. Return fire. Because while the Empire's attack had been disrupted, humanity's had not. The surviving layers of projectiles, now perfectly aligned, slammed into the Imperial fleet. And, this time, there was no defense left. Shields, already strained, couldn't adapt fast enough. Energy systems, destabilized by their own disrupted attack, failed to compensate. The impacts were clean, precise, catastrophic. One flagship took a direct hit through its core. Another lost its entire forward section. A third detonated, not from energy, but from internal systems collapsing under sudden decompression and structural failure. Multiple losses, the analyst shouted. Critical systems failing across the fleet. Sarath stood frozen, not in fear, but in realization. They didn't just survive it, she said slowly. They used it. The Empire's greatest weapon, its ultimate advantage, turned into a weakness. Because humans hadn't tried to beat it. They had simply understood it better. Another wave of impacts followed, then another. And now, the Imperial fleet was no longer advancing. It was breaking. On Earth, the command center remained silent, focused, professional. But beneath it, there was something else. Not celebration, not yet, but the quiet, undeniable shift of momentum. Rook looked at the display, at the once invincible armada, now struggling to hold formation. They're starting to feel it, he said. Feel what? The tactical officer asked. Rook's voice was calm, steady, certain. The truth. Another volley launched. Relentless, unstoppable. That power doesn't win wars. The impact spread across the Imperial fleet, tearing through ships that had never known vulnerability. Understanding does. And far out in the void, for the first time in thousands of years, the Empire was losing. The Empire had never learned how to retreat. Not truly. For thousands of cycles, every conflict it entered ended the same way. Overwhelming force, absolute victory, total control. Even when resistance appeared, it was crushed before it could become a threat. There had never been a need to fall back. Never a need to regroup. Never a need to survive. So when the first Imperial ships began to pull away, not in formation, not in strategy, but in instinct, it wasn't a maneuver. It was confusion. Rear lines are breaking, an officer shouted. Multiple vessels attempting unsanctioned withdrawal. Sarath didn't turn. Override them, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the rising noise. Re-establish formation immediately. We're trying, the analyst replied. But command relays are lagging. Too many systems are offline. Another impact rippled through the fleet. A cruiser lost propulsion and drifted directly into the path of a second ship, both torn apart seconds later by incoming kinetics that didn't care about collision avoidance. They're targeting our movement now, another officer said. Not just our structure, our behavior. Because the moment the Empire hesitated, humanity noticed. On Earth, Rook watched the shift with quiet intensity. "They're slipping," the tactical officer said. Rook nodded. "Yeah. They're not used to this." "No," he agreed. "They're not used to losing control." The display showed it clearly now, the perfect geometry of the Imperial fleet unraveling. Ships moving without coordination. Gaps forming where none should exist. Defensive coverage overlapping inefficiently. "They built everything around dominance," Rook said. Another volley launched. This one faster, sharper. They never planned for resistance that adapts. Out in the void, human projectiles began to change again. No longer just aimed at ships. Now they targeted space itself. New firing patterns detected, the Imperial analyst called out. "They're saturating specific zones, creating barriers." Saratha's eyes narrowed. "Barriers." "Yes, fields of kinetic debris. High-density, micromass moving at extreme velocities. They're not aiming to hit us directly. They're shaping the battlefield." And suddenly, there were walls. Invisible, silent, deadly. Imperial ships attempting to reposition found themselves crossing into these zones and instantly suffering catastrophic damage as thousands of microprojectiles shredded through their hulls. "They're hurting us," someone whispered, because there was no other word for it. Humanity wasn't just attacking anymore. They were controlling movement, dictating space, turning freedom into a trap. On Earth, Rook watched as the Imperial fleet's options narrowed. "Zone control holding," the tactical officer confirmed. "They're getting boxed in." "Good," Rook said. "Tighten it." "Sir, we're committing a lot of ammo to this." "I know. And if they break through?" Rook didn't hesitate. "They won't. Because now the Empire faced something it had never encountered before. Not just an enemy, but a system. A strategy that didn't rely on a single strike or a single advantage, but on constant pressure, constant adaptation, constant control. Back in orbit, Sarath saw it too. The invisible lines forming around her fleet, the narrowing paths, the increasing cost of every movement. "They're not fighting us directly anymore," she said slowly. "They're constraining us." Another ship attempted to accelerate out of position. It lasted less than a second inside one of the kinetic zones. "High Admiral, we're losing maneuverability across all sectors," the analyst said. Sarath stepped forward, her presence suddenly heavier. "Then we stop moving like prey." The room stilled. "Reform the core," she ordered. "Centralize surviving vessels. Layer shields. Maximum density." A risky move, one they had abandoned earlier. But now, it was the only way to regain stability. The fleet began to pull inward, ships clustering, overlapping defenses, rebuilding something closer to their original strength. On Earth, the change registered immediately. "They're compressing," the tactical officer said. Rook watched carefully. "Yeah," he murmured. "They're trying to take back control." "Do we stop them?" Rook was quiet for a moment. Then, "No." The officer blinked. "No." Rook's eyes didn't leave the display. "Let them." Confusion flickered across the room. "Sir, that gives them stronger defenses." "Exactly." A pause. Then realization began to spread. "Oh." Rook allowed himself a small, grim smile. "They think density makes them safer." Another volley prepared. This one different. "Load heavy mass," Rook ordered. The tactical officer's eyes widened slightly. All ships. All ships." "Sir, that'll drain." "Do it." Out in the void, the human fleet shifted again. Rails adjusting. Payloads changing. This time, not micromass. Not fragmentation. Something heavier. Denser. Slower. But unstoppable. Back in the Imperial command chamber, Sarath watched the human formation change. "They're preparing another attack," an officer said. "Let them," Sarath replied coldly. "Our defenses are stabilized. They will not penetrate this time." Because now the Empire had adapted. Now they were ready, or so they believed. On Earth, Rook gave the final command. "Fire." The projectiles launched, fewer this time, but massive, dense slugs of compressed material, accelerated to speeds that made their sheer weight irrelevant. "They're going straight in," the tactical officer said. "No evasive patterns." No layering. Rook nodded. Because this time, the projectiles crossed the distance rapidly. Imperial shields flared, stronger now, reinforced, overlapping. The first impact hit and stopped. For a fraction of a second, it held. Shield holding, the analyst shouted, relief flooding his voice. Then the second impact hit. Same point, same angle. The shield rippled. The third hit, then the fourth, then the fifth. Each one striking the exact same location. Perfect precision, perfect timing. They're stacking impacts, the analyst yelled, compounding stress faster than the shield can redistribute. The shield broke, not shattered, not exploded. It simply failed. And the next projectile passed through, straight into the heart of the clustered fleet. What followed was an explosion. It was collapse. Ships packed tightly together, now vulnerable to the very thing meant to protect them. One penetrator became many. Fragments tearing through multiple vessels. Chain reactions. Internal destruction spreading faster than any energy blast could have achieved. Multiple core breaches, someone screamed. We're losing entire sections. Sareth stood motionless as the reports flooded in. This time, there was no confusion, no misunderstanding, just clarity. They anticipated this, she said quietly. They wanted us to cluster. Because humans didn't just react. They guided. They shaped. They led the enemy exactly where they wanted them to be. On Earth, Rook watched the Imperial formation collapse inward on itself. Direct hit confirmed, the tactical officer said, voice barely above a whisper. Rook nodded slowly. Maintain pressure. Another volley loaded. Another wave ready. Relentless. Because the fight wasn't over. Not yet. But now, there was no doubt left. The invincible armada was bleeding. And it didn't know how to stop. The galaxy didn't witness the turning point all at once. It spread like a whisper. At first, it was just fragmented data. Distorted signals picked up by distant listening posts, strange telemetry leaking through subspace channels, incomplete battle logs intercepted at the edge of known space. Most civilizations ignored it, because it didn't make sense. The Imperial Armada is sustaining losses. That sentence alone was enough to raise doubt. Because the Empire didn't sustain losses. It inflicted them, always, without exception. But then more reports followed. Ships going dark, formations collapsing, energy signatures destabilizing, and something else, something far more unsettling. They are being destroyed by kinetics. Across the galaxy, that word carried weight. Not fear, not at first, just disbelief. In one distant system, a council of elder species reviewed the incoming data in silence. These readings are corrupted, one of them said flatly. There is no known method by which primitive projectile systems can bypass Imperial shielding. And yet, another replied, the data is consistent across multiple sources. A pause. Then, replay the engagement. The projection lit up, not with dramatic visuals, but with cold, undeniable telemetry. Vectors, impacts, failures, patterns. And as the simulation unfolded, the room grew quiet. Because it wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was methodical. They are not overpowering the Empire, one of the elders said slowly. They are dismantling it. Back in the battlefield, that dismantling continued. Relentless, precise, unforgiving. The Imperial fleet, once a flawless display of unity, now struggled to maintain even basic coordination. Communication delays increasing, an officer shouted. Signal interference across multiple sectors. They're not interfering, another replied, voice tight. They're saturating space with kinetic noise. Our systems are overwhelmed trying to track everything. Because every projectile, every fragment, every piece of accelerated mass was more than a weapon. It was interference, disruption, chaos engineered with purpose. Sareth stood at the center of it all, her posture still composed, but the weight of the situation now undeniable. Status, she demanded. The answer came quickly, and it was worse than before. We have lost 32% of active vessels. Shield integrity across remaining fleet is unstable. Maneuverability is restricted by hostile kinetic zones. A pause. Then, more quietly, we are no longer in control of the battlefield. Silence followed, because that sentence should not have been possible. On Earth, Rook heard the same reality, just framed differently. They're breaking apart, the tactical officer said. Rook didn't celebrate, didn't smile. He just watched. Yeah, he said. They are. The display showed it clearly now. Imperial ships moving not as a unified force, but as isolated units, each trying to survive in a space that had turned against them. They're reacting instead of planning, another officer added. Rook nodded. And that's when you lose. Another volley fired. This one surgical. Targeting not clusters, but stragglers. Ships cut off from the main formation. We're picking them apart, the tactical officer said. Good, Rook replied. Keep it clean. No wasted shots. Because this wasn't about overwhelming force anymore. It was about efficiency, precision, control. Back in orbit, Sareth watched as another group of ships vanished from the display. Not destroyed all at once, but erased piece by piece. They're isolating us, she said. Yes, High Admiral, the analyst confirmed. They're targeting vessels that deviate from optimal positioning. Any break in formation becomes a vulnerability. They're punishing mistakes. Because humans didn't need perfection. They just needed opportunity. And the Empire was giving them plenty. Another impact. Closer this time. The observation deck trembled slightly. A sensation so rare it felt almost alien. Defensive layers are failing, an officer said. Sareth remained still, thinking, calculating, adapting. Because for the first time in her career, she was no longer commanding a victory. She was managing a loss. And that required something the Empire had not practiced in generations. Transmit to all vessels, she said. The room stilled. New directive, survival priority. Several officers turned toward her, shock flickering across their expressions. High Admiral, that will reduce offensive output significantly. I am aware. And if we cede initiative, we have already lost it, Sareth cut in. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. We will not regain control by pretending we still have it. A heavy silence followed. Then, directive acknowledged. Across the Imperial fleet, the change was immediate. Ships began to pull back, not chaotically this time, but deliberately. Defensive positioning, minimized exposure, reduced aggression. For the first time, the Empire was fighting to survive. On Earth, the shift registered instantly. They're falling back, the tactical officer said. Rook watched carefully. Not running, he said. No, just not pushing forward. They're adapting again. A pause. Do we let them? Rook didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment. The point where victory could either be secured or lost. They're scared now, the officer added quietly. Rook's gaze remained fixed on the display. Good, he said. Another volley loaded. Another decision forming. But fear doesn't end wars. He stepped forward slightly, his voice calm, measured, final. Pressure does. The human fleet shifted again. Not wildly, not aggressively, just enough, just precisely enough to close the gap. Back in orbit, Sareth saw it happening. The slow, inevitable tightening. The enemy that didn't rush, didn't overextend, didn't make mistakes. They're not letting us go, the analyst whispered. No, Sareth said. Her eyes locked onto the advancing formation. They're finishing this. Another impact. Then another. Closer now. More frequent. The space around the Imperial fleet shrinking with every second. And across the galaxy, more eyes turned toward the battle. More systems listening. More civilizations watching the impossible unfold. Because the whispers had become something else now. Something louder. Something undeniable. The Empire was losing. And humanity was making sure the galaxy saw it happen. There was no grand announcement. No final declaration from the Empire. No dramatic rallying cry. Just a quiet, irreversible shift. The moment when survival stopped being enough. and extinction became possible. Across the battlefield, what remained of the Imperial Armada compressed inward. Not out of strategy this time, but necessity. Ships clustered in fractured layers, overlapping weakened shields, sharing failing systems, clinging to whatever structure they could still maintain. They were no longer a spear, no longer a wall. They were a wound trying to close. Remaining combat-capable vessels at 41%. The analyst reported, voice strained but controlled. Energy reserves critically reduced across multiple sectors. Sereth stood at the center of the command chamber, her gaze fixed on the human fleet that refused to stop advancing. "They're slowing," one officer said carefully. "Their rate of fire has decreased." It was true. The relentless storm of kinetics had softened. Not stopped, but changed. Measured now, deliberate, as if something was being prepared. Sereth noticed it immediately. "They are conserving," she said. "For what?" another officer asked. Sereth didn't answer, because she already knew. On Earth, the command center had grown quieter, not with fear, but with focus sharpened to its absolute edge. "Ammo reserves at 32%, the tactical officer said. "We can sustain current pressure, but not much longer." Rook nodded slowly. "That's fine." He stepped closer to the display, zooming in, not on the entire fleet, not on the scattered enemy ships, but on the center, the last place the Empire still held together. "They've compressed as far as they can," he said. "Yeah," the officer replied. "They've basically built a defensive core." Rook's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not basically." A pause. "That's exactly what they did." Silence settled over the room as the realization began to form. "Sir," the tactical officer said quietly, "if we hit that, we don't get a second chance," Rook finished. Because this was it. Not another phase. Not another exchange. This was the end. Back in orbit, Sereth issued her final set of orders. All vessels converge remaining energy into core defensive layers. Reinforce central shields. Prepare for maximum impact. The Empire had adapted as far as it could. Now it would endure, or it would fall. "There are no further tactical options," the analyst said softly. Sereth didn't look away from the display. "I am aware." Her voice was steady, unshaken, but beneath it, there was something new. Not fear, not doubt, but acceptance. Because, for the first time in her existence, she was facing an opponent she could not outthink, only outlast. And even that was uncertain. On Earth, Rook exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's end this." The room went still. Every system, every ship, every calculation, all aligning toward a single moment. "Bring all remaining mass to primary rails," Rook ordered. "No reserves. No secondary waves. Everything." The tactical officer hesitated for half a second. Then, "Yes, sir." Across the human fleet, the shift was immediate. All remaining ammunition, all stored mass, all available material, loaded, not just into the largest ships, but into every vessel capable of firing, even damaged ones, even those barely holding together. "Synchronization?" Rook asked. "Aligning, now we're within acceptable variance." "Not good enough," Rook said. "A beat. Make it perfect." Because this strike had to be. Back in orbit, the Imperial fleet braced. Energy fields layered over each other, thick, dense, radiant, the brightest they had ever burned. Core shields at maximum capacity, the analyst confirmed. Sereth watched in silence, waiting for impact, but nothing came. Seconds passed, then more. "They're not firing," one officer said. Confusion flickered across the room. "Why would they wait?" another asked. Sereth's gaze sharpened. "They're not waiting," she said. "They're aligning." And then, it happened. On Earth, Rook gave the command. Fire. No countdown. No hesitation. Just execution. Across the human fleet, everything launched. Not in waves. Not in layers. But in one single, unified strike. Thousands of projectiles. Perfectly synchronized. Perfectly aligned. All aimed at one point. The heart of the Imperial defense. The void itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, impact. The first wave struck the outer shield layer and held. For a fraction of a second, it resisted. "Shields holding," an officer shouted. Then the second line of impacts hit. Same point, same angle. The shield rippled violently. The third line hit. Then the fourth. Then the fifth. Each one landing within microseconds of the last. No gaps. No variation. Just relentless, compounding force. "They're not giving it time to recover," the analyst yelled. "The shield can't redistribute fast enough." Cracks began to form. Not visible, but measurable. Instabilities. Fluctuations. Failure points. "Reinforce," someone shouted. "Divert more power." "We can't," the analyst replied. "We're already at maximum output." Another line of impacts hit, and the shield collapsed. Not explosively, not dramatically. It simply ceased to exist. And then, everything behind it became vulnerable. The remaining projectiles, hundreds, thousands, poured through the opening, straight into the core. What followed wasn't a single explosion. It was a cascade, a chain reaction of destruction ripping through tightly packed ships, tearing through shared systems, collapsing structures faster than they could fail gracefully. One ship broke apart, then another, then dozens. The core unraveled from the inside out. "Catastrophic failure across all sectors," the analyst screamed. "We're losing everything." Sereth stood still as the display filled with loss, with collapse, with the end of something that had once seemed eternal. And in that moment, she understood not just how they lost, but why. "They didn't fight us," she said quietly. "No one responded. They solved us." Another impact. Closer now. The observation deck trembled again. And this time, there was no recovery. On Earth, the command center remained silent, watching as the Imperial core disintegrated, as the invincible armada finally broke. Rook didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He just stood there and watched it end. Because victory wasn't loud. Not like this. It was quiet, final, inevitable. Another report came in. Enemy formation collapsing completely. Rook nodded once. Maintain observation. No follow-up attack. No unnecessary fire. Because the war was already over. Out in the void, the last remnants of the Empire's fleet drifted. Broken, scattered, no longer a threat. And in their place, humanity remained. Not untouched, not unharmed, but standing. And for the first time, unchallenged. The silence after the battle was heavier than the war itself. No more impacts. No more energy surges. No more movement that meant anything. Just debris. Endless, drifting debris. Fragments of ships that had once ruled entire star systems, now reduced to nothing more than cold metal slowly tumbling through the void. And in the middle of it all, humanity remained. Not untouched, not unbroken, but still standing. On Earth, the command center didn't erupt into celebration. There were no cheers, no applause, only quiet confirmations. Final scans complete. No active hostile signatures. Residual energy fields dissipating. Surviving enemy vessels non-combat capable. Each report came in like a closing door, one after another, until finally, it's over. Rook stood still for a long moment, then nodded. "Stand down offensive operations," he said. His voice was calm, steady, but beneath it, there was weight, because this wasn't just a victory. It was a message, one that the entire galaxy had just received. Across distant systems, that message was already spreading, not as rumors anymore, not as fragmented data, but as confirmed reality. The Imperial Armada has been defeated. Entire civilizations paused, watched, replayed the data over and over again, searching for errors that didn't exist. They were destroyed by kinetic weaponry. That part hit harder, because it wasn't just the loss that mattered. It was how it happened. In one high council chamber, an elder species leaned forward, its voice low and thoughtful. They did not surpass the Empire's technology. A pause. They redefined its limitations. Because humanity hadn't built something greater. They had taken something simpler and pushed it further than anyone thought possible. Back in orbit, what remained of the Imperial fleet drifted in silence. Emergency signals flickered weakly. Fragments of communication, broken, incomplete, fading. At the center of it all, the observation deck still held together. Barely. Inside, Sareth stood alone. Most of her command staff was gone, lost in the collapse. Systems around her flickered, struggling to maintain even minimal functionality. She looked out at the battlefield, at the human fleet, still there, still organized, still controlled. "They're not advancing," she said quietly. No one answered. There was no one left to answer. A faint transmission signal blinked on her console. Incoming. Human origin. She stared at it for a moment, then accepted. The image that appeared was simple. No elaborate projection. No overwhelming display of power. Just a single human figure. Admiral Rook. "Hi, Admiral," he said, his voice steady. Sareth studied him. This was the being who had undone an empire, not through overwhelming force, but through something far more dangerous. Understanding. "You have won," she said. No anger, no bitterness, just truth. Rook didn't smile. "This wasn't about winning," he replied. A slight pause. "It was about surviving." Sareth considered that, then nodded once. A distinction we failed to recognize. Silence settled between them for a moment. Not hostile, not tense, just real. "You could finish it," Sareth said. Her gaze shifted slightly toward the shattered remains of her fleet. "And what's left?" Rook's expression didn't change. "We could," he said. Another pause. "But we won't." That caught her off guard. "Why?" Rook leaned back slightly. "Because the answer mattered. Not just for her, but for anyone who would hear it. Because this," he said, gesturing to the battlefield behind him, "was never supposed to happen." His voice remained calm, measured. But if it had to, then it needed to mean something. Sareth's eyes narrowed slightly. "Meaning?" Rook nodded. "A reminder. A beat. That power isn't about what you have." His gaze locked with hers. "It's about how you use it." Silence followed. Then slowly, Sareth inclined her head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The transmission ended, and for a long moment, she remained where she was, watching the species that had done the impossible, that had taken the simplest principle in the universe and turned it into something unstoppable. Momentum, not just of mass, but of thought, of adaptation, of refusal to break. On Earth, the final phase began. Recovery. Rescue operations launched. Damaged ships pulled back. Survivors retrieved. The cost of victory accounted for. Because humanity didn't forget its losses. It carried them, learned from them, built on them. And as the fleet slowly reorganized, a message began to transmit, not just to the Empire, but to anyone listening. Clear, simple, unmistakable. This is humanity. A pause. From deep within the command center, someone added quietly, "From HFY Global Tales, we remember who we are." Rook allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, because the story wouldn't end here. It never did. Out in the void, the debris continued to drift, silent, endless, but no longer meaningless, because now it marked the place where the galaxy learned something new. That progress didn't always mean complexity. That advancement didn't always mean abandoning the old. And that sometimes the most powerful weapon in existence was the one everyone else had forgotten. The war was over, but the impact? That would echo across the stars for a very long time. And this time, humanity wasn't the one being underestimated. They were the ones being remembered. If you made it this far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to HFY Global Tales, and share your thoughts in the comments, because the next story might be the one where humanity changes everything again.